Good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining this poll briefing and big announcement with Maine U.S. Senate candidate Graham Platner. We're so happy to see you all here, ready to learn about the most critical Senate race in the country next year. If we haven't met, my name is Hannah Riddle. I'm the Director of Candidate Services here at the Progressive Change Campaign Committee. So great to see you all here this morning. I'm going to give folks a couple seconds to get on and get their audio connected, but in the meantime, if you're joining us on Zoom or via live stream, we would love to see where you're calling in from. So if you feel comfortable doing so, please put your name and your hometown in the chat or in the comments if you're live streaming on Facebook. A few logistical notes before we dive in. First, if you're comfortable doing so, please turn on your camera. We want to see your beautiful faces. We want to feel like we're together in a room with all of you. This morning, we're going to be hearing from Progressive Change Campaign Committee co-founders Adam Green and Stephanie Taylor, pollster Nancy Zadunkowitz from Z2A Research, and Maine U.S. Senate candidate Graham Platner. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions. So to be called on to ask a question live, first, please send it in the Zoom chat with your hometown and your state. If you're a reporter, please include your outlet and feel free to post your questions at any point during the call. If you're joining us on Zoom, be on the lookout for a direct message in the chat. The chat is going to be very important throughout this call. We'll be putting plenty of important links in there and communicating with you about questions. So make sure you open the chat. It's that little dialog box at the bottom of your screen with three little dots in it. If your question is selected, we will message you in the chat and you'll see a pop-up to unmute yourself. Please keep your question between 10 and 20 seconds so we can get to as many topics as possible. And if you're tuning in on Facebook, we will be monitoring the chat and try to read some questions posted in the live stream. With that, we are going to be giving a big greeting to Graham Platner by unmuting everyone and inviting you to make some noise. So, and demonstrate how ready you are to fight for democracy today. So on the count of three, let's all say hello and show your enthusiasm. So 1, 2, 3.
Hey, Graham.
Woo!
Excellent.
Oh, whoa.
Welcome.
Excited.
All right. With that, we are going to, I'm happy to introduce Progressive Change Campaign Committee co-founder Adam Green to frame this big news today.
Great. Thanks so much, Hannah. And hello, everybody. I see some very familiar faces here on the Zoom. We're thrilled to be joined by so many people across the nation and those joining on live stream on the various social media outlets. So today we have a big poll and a big announcement. And our pollster, Nancy Zadunkowitz, will lay out numbers that show insurgent Maine Senate candidate Graham Platner is currently up 20 points in the Democratic primary over Governor Janet Mills of Maine. And after voters hear a bio and criticisms of each, Platner's lead actually increases to 24%. So we're excited to show that to you. This is huge news. And we are thrilled to add to that news by announcing this today. The Progressive Change Campaign Committee proudly endorses working class champion Graham Platner for U.S. Senate in Maine. It's official. We're doing it. And we believe this is the most important race in the entire 2026 election cycle. And it provides a lesson for Democrats about how to run and win in swing states. Graham Platner is a bold, shake up the system, working class hero who is inspiring voters with a vision of increased quality of life while fighting corporate and billionaire villains who stand in the way. It's very important that both of those are true, having a vision and fighting the actual villains. In this primary, we predict that Graham Platner will defeat the 77-year-old governor who vetoed a wealth tax, vetoed mandatory rape kit testing, vetoed pro-worker bills, and has no inspiring vision for the future except following Chuck Schumer's failing leadership. I refer everyone to a story posted this morning by The Lever's Luke Goldstein that we will put in the chat right now about Janet Mills' record of vetoing popular pro-worker and corporate accountability legislation. It's an important read. We are proud to be one of Graham Platner's first national endorsements. Our organization has raised over $37 million in grassroots donations for candidates over the years. And starting today, starting in a few seconds in the chat, Progressive Change Campaign Committee will be asking our national membership to donate to Graham Platner's campaign and to volunteer for his efforts. During this call, we'll be posting links so you can take this action right away. Before seeing the polling, we want to make clear why this polling is so newsworthy, and it is by far the most credible and accurate polling of this race so far. First and foremost, it's the most recent. It was taken just before Thanksgiving. All other recent polls were done in October, as many of the opening dynamics of this race were in formation. Second, it is done by one of the most accurate pollsters in past election cycles, Nancy Zunkowitz, who will be presenting today. But third is methodology. There was an initial University of New Hampshire poll done October 16th to 21st that sampled 506 likely Democratic primary voters. It was fine. Another poll by SoCal Strategies from October 21st to 25th also polled 500 likely Democratic primary voters. It weirdly only tested negative messages against Graham Platner, and then, surprise, surprise, announced that his support went down when people only heard negative stuff about him. Not exactly the dream team of pollsters there. A more recent poll by Maine People's Resource Center from October 26th to 25th had a credible sample of 783 Maine voters in the general election and actually showed Platner defeating Collins while Mills loses to Collins. But their Democratic primary sample was only 344 respondents and was all voters, not likely voters. So it was fine, but not as credible. Our fresh poll has 845 likely Democratic primary voters in Maine. It gets an initial read of the race and then gets voter reaction after an even-handed set of bios and negative attacks on both candidates. And here's the most exciting part for purposes of this call right now. Graham Platner has not seen the results yet, and he will be learning about them on this call, and we'll get a very fresh reaction, so stay tuned for that. With that, I'm thrilled to turn things over to my co-founder, Dr. Stephanie Taylor, for more on why this race is so important and to introduce our pollster. Stephanie?
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody. You'll hear more from our pollster in a minute, but I wanted to draw attention first to two very significant findings in this poll. And first, according to this poll, as Adam said, Graham Platner is currently winning the primary by a huge margin, but also he is better positioned to beat Susan Collins. He has a higher ceiling and more room to grow. So for anyone who cares about beating Susan Collins and winning back the Maine Senate seat, this poll tells a very clear story that you'll see in just a minute. And second, it's clear that voters, including many independent voters, like his message. They like him as a candidate. Voters in Maine are sick and tired of the status quo. They want a senator who lives in the same economic reality that the rest of us live in, a senator who's angry about corruption and the cost of living and who's ready to do something about it. So I'm so excited now for Nancy Zunkowitz of Z&A Research to walk us through these poll results, and then we'll hear from Graham Platner himself. Again, please remember, Graham has not seen these results before now. So Nancy, I will turn things over to you.
Hi, everybody. Just no pressure presenting to the candidate for the first time. I'm excited to be with all of you today. I've already had a great introduction, so I will try not to repeat too much so that we can get right into the nitty-gritty of this data. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, let's get started. So again, I want to thank PCC for making an investment. You've heard about how this is a higher quality survey than some of the others. And I just again want to thank PCC for making that investment. I know there's been a lot of attention, and so it's exciting to have real data that we can trust. There have been other public polls, but none have had as robust of an insights. Again, we surveyed 1,482 likely midterm voters in November in Maine from the 14th through the 18th of November. Our base sample had 852 likely November voters plus a 630 likely Democratic primary voter oversample. So in total, there's 845 likely Democratic primary voters in our sample, which is to say we have a robust sample. As a result, our margin of error when presenting the Democratic primary electorate results are going to be about 3.5% and then lower for the full November electorate. So what did we find? Graham is leading the primary by a whopping 20 points. His lead only grows after respondents hear positives and negatives and rebuttals from the candidates after we basically simulate the campaign. And other polls have tested negatives about Graham, but not the other candidates. And that isn't how campaigns work. So we did better. And Graham's lead over Mills does not diminish as voters hear more. In fact, it grows. And Platner is also well known to primary voters despite being a newcomer. And there are many strong favorable opinions of him, actually more than for Mills. And this is actually what we look for in a Democratic primary because presumably both Democrats will be seen favorably by their own party. Intensity really matters, and he's got that advantage already. Moreover, he has more potential than Mills does when it comes to winning a general election. When we test their positive pitches, Mills has a lower ceiling than Platner does. As I mentioned before, we tested positives and critiques of both candidates, and the critique of Mills for her age, her ties to Washington establishment, also her controversial vetoes, including vetoing a wealth tax and rape kit funding, those are more damaging than are the critiques of Platner. And finally, the overall political environment, it's just worth noting, it really favors Graham in a general election. Trump and Collins are unpopular. Voters want to check on them. And they keep telling us also that they are done with elderly politicians of both parties. So, as I mentioned before, Platner isn't just leading in the Democratic primary, he's leading by a lot, 20 points. 58% are supporting him, only 38% are supporting Mills. There are very few undecided voters or weak supporters for Mills to win over at this point in the race. This is really impressive early consolidation. And it actually means even more to me to see this right now because, Mills is a well-known commodity. It'd be different if it was somebody else, but it's her. So this is an informed opinion. And that, again, makes it even more impressive. Where does Graham's advantage come from? Well, he's leading by 20-point margins with men, with women, with working class voters, with college educated voters. His lead is even larger for the folks who are under 50. But even when we get to seniors, which are a really large chunk of the Democratic primary electorate, he's keeping things competitive too. So it's really hard to see where Mills could possibly get an edge here because this is such an impressive margin across demographics. And in a really short period of time, Graham has been able to do this because he's really captured the attention of Mainers. Already, 93% of Democratic primary voters are saying that they can ID him by name. Only 7% say that they don't know who he is. And fully 78% say that they know him well enough to offer an opinion of him one way or the other. But even with slightly lower name ID, he's already nearly as popular as the sitting governor, the sitting Democratic governor with Democratic primary voters. 63% view him favorably. And that 6-point gap between him and Mills when it comes to favorability is entirely a matter of having universal name recognition. And even though there's been a lot of attention that might lead someone to say, well, what are his unfavorables? Only 15% are unfavorable. In fact, she has higher unfavorable ratings too. And in a Democratic primary where we expect for large majorities to be favorable towards both of the candidates, what really matters to me as a campaign pollster is intensity. And so here we're seeing that Graham already has an intensity advantage. 40% of Democratic primary voters are strongly favorable towards him, just 31% for Mills. That really means a lot. And again, this is with lower name recognition than her. Now, folks might say, well, they just haven't heard the case for Mills yet, or they just haven't heard the critiques of Platner yet. And so we simulated a campaign in which voters heard positives from both of the candidates in their own words, and then they heard rebuttals and critiques from each candidate. And not only does Mills not improve her margins, if anything, she does a bit worse. As you can see by this progression here from a 20-point margin to 24, 25-point margin. We also see that Platner is a more attractive option when we get to the general election. So we tested positive biographies of the two candidates in their own words. This is who they are, why they're running, why we should trust them, why they're the best person to win in November, what they do in office. Again, these are written in the candidate's own words. And this is supposed to simulate their positive pitch. Respondents were then asked to rate their interest in supporting each candidate on a scale from 1 to 7, where 1 means that you definitely will not support them, and 7 means you definitely will. And what we see is that 56% majority of voters say that there's a chance that they would come to support him. Meanwhile, a 53% majority are already saying that they're unlikely to support Mills. Basically, she has a much lower ceiling, and he has much more potential. And again, this is with the general election, the November midterm electorate. Finally, I just want to keep coming back to this intensity advantage. We see that the voters are 11 points more likely to say that they'll definitely support Graham. Meanwhile, voters were 11 points more likely to say they definitely would not support Mills. So the intensity advantage is really evident here in the November electorate as well. Of course, voters are going to hear negatives in a race. And so we tested the critiques of both candidates as well as their rebuttals. And so I'm going to read those really quickly. Critics of Graham Platner say he's unelectable because of his old Reddit comments on the internet, where he identifies as a communist, calls white rural people stupid and racist, calls police officers. This is as hard as you can possibly make this critique, right? On the other hand, we responded saying Platner says he wasn't aware of the connotations of the tattoo he got with fellow Marines 20 years ago and has covered it up. He says internet posts were from a dark time when he had PTSD after military service, and they don't represent who he is today. He says he's motivating working class and rural Mainers, and the Washington establishment is trying to tear him down because he'll defeat Susan Collins and bring real change. On the other hand, here's what people haven't been talking about. Janet Mills is 77 years old, would be the oldest new senator ever, and won't release her medical records. Critics say she's planned to retire until Washington establishment politicians recruited her to run. And she's funded by corporate donors after vetoing a tax on the wealthiest governor. She also vetoed a bill requiring rape kit testing, vetoed a bill strengthening workers' rights, and vetoed 2 bills reducing prescription drug costs. She then responds with her own argument about electability being the only Democrat that could possibly defeat Susan Collins, having been elected governor twice, that she shows up every day to show that she's up for the task of fighting Donald Trump, and has promised also to only serve 1 term in the U.S. Senate. So again, this is the kind of real hard critiques that we would expect to see, as well as the sort of electability arguments and rebuttals that we also would expect to see in a real campaign. So what happens? As you can see, we did not hold back. Well, half of the November electorate says that they're less likely to support Mills after hearing this. So the critique of Mills is more damaging than the critique of Platner is, but you might not be aware of that if you're, Chuck Schumer. Now, on the other hand, only 39% say that they're less likely to support Platner after hearing this critique and rebuttal. In fact, 21% of voters said that they're actually more likely to support him after having heard this critique and rebuttal. And by the way, if these results are surprising to you, you just have not been paying attention to voters. Voters are done with elderly politicians, and they're done with establishment politicians. And again, after all of this, Mills actually does a bit worse. And this tells me that the sort of critiques that have been made of Graham have already really been metabolized by the electorate. And I would say it's nice that this was done early, and we can go pivot back now to what's really attracting voters to Graham, which is his positive message. And voters, I think, have been receptive to the response to the critiques. And that's evident by this question when we ask people, which comes closer to your point of view, that Platner's the kind of normal person who makes mistakes and evolves, that we need more of in politics, especially if they connect with working people back home, or that Platner's unvetted and untested and has questionable values. It's too risky for being a U.S. senator. 71% of Democratic primary voters say they agree with the statement that he's the kind of normal person who makes mistakes that we need in politics. And then so do 56% of independents and a November midterm electorate. So again, not just Democrats are saying this, but also independents are saying this. And I will say I do a lot of focus groups, and I think I hear there's people who more embody that blue statement when I talk to actual voters than the weaker statement about questioning values. And finally, I just want to drive home again how much this political environment is set up against Collins. 58% of November voters say that they would rather the next U.S. Congress be controlled by Democrats who will offer a check and balance on Trump, versus just 42% who say they'd rather be controlled by Republicans who will work with Trump to get things done. And If you look at favorability ratings, we also see about 6 and 10 are unfavorable towards both Trump and Collins. And in fact, only 31% of voters have a favorable opinion of Susan Collins. Plus, she kind of lacks that intensity that Trump enjoys when he has favorable opinions towards him. So there's a real chance for Democrats to flip this seat. As Adam and Stephanie were saying, this is the most flippable seat, and in November. There is a real strategic question to be asked of Senator Schumer here about why he's inserting himself in this race at all, and especially against Democrats' overwhelming frontrunner. And with that, I will turn it back over.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy. Really, really fascinating results. I do want to emphasize one more time because it is so important. These results show that Graham Platner is best positioned to win both the primary and the general election. I'm so excited that the Progressive Change Campaign Committee is endorsing Graham Platner for U.S. Senate today. And now, with that, I would like to welcome Graham to speak directly to all of us.
Thank you all so very much. I mean, this is it's amazing to see what it feels like on the ground being reflected directly in a poll like this. It's nice to put some, I think, evidence behind the anecdotal feeling that we're getting out here in Maine. I cannot thank the P trip. I've been calling you guys the P trip quietly to myself. But the Progressive Change Campaign Committee for your support in this and for doing this poll and for the endorsement, it truly means a lot, and it's an absolute honor to be in this fight with you guys. This, I think, just lays clear what our theory was, which is that we are not going to defeat Susan Collins running the same exact kind of playbook that we've run in the past, which is an establishment politician supported by the power structures, supported by Washington, D.C., coming up to Maine and trying to run just a kind of standard race. That is what has failed over and over and over again, and we are trying to do something entirely different. We are really trying to build a grassroots movement up here. We need to build power again for working people, both in Maine and nationally. And this race specifically is an opportunity to do this on a scale, and I think with an amount of success that we don't really see elsewhere at the moment. And it's an absolute honor for me to be able to take part in it. We need to change politics in this country. We need to have a politics that represents working people. We need to have a politics that is accessible to working people. In many ways, we win this. The whole point is that we get to show a method forward as to how we put working people in politics again. Because the only way that we're going to represent the working class of the United States is by putting people from the working class of the United States into positions of power. And I will just end. I don't want to ramble for too long because I know we have questions to get to. But I will just end with a quote from my favorite founding father, who some people don't count, but I think is the most important one, which is Thomas Paine. And we have it in our power to begin the world over again. And that is exactly the power that we have to build with this campaign and exactly the task that we have at hand. And so thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Graham. We are honored to be in this fight with you. If there's one person who remembers Thomas Paine, is our friend Jamie Raskin, so you're in good company there. That was a great quote. So in a moment, we're going to start our question and answer session. A reminder, just to ask a question, please click on the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. Include your hometown and state along with your question. If you're a journalist, include your outlet. And if you're called on, we'll unmute you. As people are getting in line, Hannah Riddle has a few comments from Maine PCCC members. We call ourselves the P-Trip. That's good, Graham. That really reflects what Graham was talking about in terms of the vibe on the ground. Hannah?
Thank you, Adam. So in addition to these numbers that you have seen today, like Adam said, we've asked voters across Maine what they think about Graham Platner. We've asked lifelong Democrats, independents, former Republicans, first-time voters. We heard from Charles Visek in Jefferson, who told us Graham is a real working Mainer who will stand up for all Mainers, support the Constitution, and fight our democracy fight for our democracy and against fascism. Eleanor Weissman in Belfast is supporting Graham because he is truly working for ordinary people, organizing to stop the rule of the oligarchy and working to restructure the system. He's organizing for the common good, not to build his own personal power. From Eli Edgecombe in Scarborough, Janet Mills is from the corporate arm that has controlled the Democratic Party my whole life and failed. This race is about whether you support rich people and corporate donors or whether you support the people who elected you. And finally, from Robin Elliott in South Portland, we need new leadership in the Democratic Party willing to work to make things better for working class people, tax the top 1%, and focus on common sense issues that benefit the working class, like raising the minimum wage and making healthcare and childcare affordable for everyone. We look forward to hearing from more of you. So a reminder, if you're joining us via Zoom, after you have submitted a question using the chat, please look out for a direct message on Zoom confirming that you're comfortable unmuting and asking your question directly. We'll then call on you and you'll see a prompt pop up on your screen to unmute so you can ask your question. And please keep those questions short so we can get to as many topics as possible. I'm going to turn it back to Adam, and he and Stephanie are going to start our Q&A session.
Sounds great. Thank you, Hannah. I noticed a couple of people raising their hand. Just a reminder that if you have a question, write it in the chat and put your hometown and we'll put you in the queue. Okay, I believe our first question comes from our friend R.L. Miller with Climate Hawks. R.L., I think you will be unmuted in a second. There you go.
Hi. Thank you so much for holding this call, Adam and Stephanie and PCCC people. Been a big fan of your work for many years. And Climate Hawks Vote endorses in competitive primaries, although we have not been in Maine since Shanna Bellows run against Susan Collins, and hoping that we have better results there. My question is foundational for any climate endorsement. Will you sign the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge, joining over 5,000 Democrats of all across the spectrum, everybody from Senator Ruben Gallego to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to obviously people like AOC and Gavin Newsom. This is an example, and I've got several others behind me.
Right.
And this is Gavin's signature up at the top.
Thank you. Graham, you can unmute yourself, I believe. And can you also, in addition to answering that question directly, talk about the role of corporate money and your posture towards corporate money in general?
Yes. Yeah, no, I am more than happy to sign that pledge. I think we need to be pushing significantly harder to a future in which renewable energies, not using fossil fuels as the baseline of how we get our energy sources, is paramount for building a world in which working people can live in. I mean, in many ways, there's kind of no point in building a political system and an economic system that helps working people if we're also destroying the planet that they require to live in. That seems self-defeating to me. And so I'm more than happy to sign that pledge. And
Thank you.
Of course, no, thank you. And to Adam's point as well, I mean, this really does kind of get to the core of why I'm doing this in many ways. Like, money in our politics, corporate money in our politics is power now. That is where power resides. It controls so much of our political system. And the only way that we are going to be able to get a future that represents the interests of people and not just corporations is by fighting back against it. And I think at this point, one of the most powerful tools we have is getting candidates who can be very vocal and very upfront about not taking corporate money. And then showing that we can win. Because if we can win while relying on money from small donors, relying on money from individual donations, not going down the corporate money route, that is how we show the system that this is a way that we can actually build power and fight back. And I think it's quite paramount for this project.
Thank you. We have a bunch of questions joining the queue. We have one from USA Today reporter Phil Bailey. Phil, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey there, how is everyone doing? Hey, Mr. Platner, how are you, sir? Wanted to ask you and get your thoughts on 2026 for the Democratic primaries as a whole. What do you think will be the theme that challengers like yourself particularly those who are younger, who are running from a more progressive platform. And after the successful win of Zohran Mamdani in New York City, we saw Abigail Spanberger win in Virginia and Mickey Sherrill in New Jersey. We've seen the mayor's race in Seattle, for example, a Democratic Socialist winning there. What do you think is going to be the overall theme that more progressive candidates need to lean into in the 2026 primary season to beat incumbents or to run and win for open seats? And how much do you think keeping Chuck Schumer out of leadership and dumping him as Democratic leader in the Senate will be a part of that narrative?
To the first part of the question, I think it's kind of twofold. I mean, one, to what I just said, I think we really do have to lean in heavily on the anti-corporate money side. In my experience, as I go around, at least in Maine, but it seems to be the case everywhere, everybody is angry about this. Independent voters, Republican voters, Democratic voters, everybody I talk to thinks there is far too much control in American politics that comes from corporate interest and money. And everybody thinks that because it's true, because we can all see it. So I think leaning heavily into the kind of anti-corruption, anti-corporate money side of things is going to be incredibly helpful. But it also kind of but that is part of also, I would just say, like a general anti-establishment element of this. Like, we are not going to get the answers of the system we have now from the people that built the system. It's just not going to happen. And I think that for candidates like myself all around the country, that is the pitch we have to make to voters, because I think voters understand this pretty fundamentally. I think they grasp the idea that if the people who benefit from the system that we have right now, that many of us are just disgusted with, the people that built it, the people that have been operating in it for decades, the people who have not been fighting against it. I mean, there are people who've been in the system and fighting it the whole time, and they are great. But there are a lot of folks who've just been in there and not really doing anything to change it. And that, I think, is going to be the winning argument, because everybody I know in the real world is angry at the system as it stands. And it really is looking for people who want to come along and change it significantly and build power to make sure that we change it in a long-term way so this doesn't come back.
As a follow-up to that, does opposing Chuck Schumer, is that a requirement to see yourself or cast yourself as an anti-establishment candidate? Do you have to necessarily be against him?
From my perspective, I would say yes. I mean, Chuck Schumer very much is at this point, pretty much the perfect example of the kind of Democrat that has been operating within the system the entire time, who has benefited from it, and yet who has gained an immense amount of power. And yet, for some reason, we can't do anything with that power. We can't seem to figure out how to utilize that power, and because of that, we lose power. when that's frankly why we find ourselves in the position that we're in right now. So I think that for Senate candidates, yeah, I think opposing Senator Schumer's leadership is fairly paramount for pushing a new way of doing things. Because, like I just said, I mean, we're not going to be able to build something new using the exact same people who built the system we have in this moment, which is the system we're all frustrated with.
Paramount. I think we have our friend Mike Shell next in the queue. Mike?
Well, thanks, Adam, and thanks, Stephanie. It's nice to see you guys. Graham, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've read a little bit about you. I have to say this presentation has had an enormous impact on my thinking about that race. My question was, I think with the preceding questioner, you pretty much hit on it. Namely, my concern is litmus tests. I'm, in the words of Al Davis, for those of you old enough to remember him, my view of the world is win, baby, win. And so litmus tests, maybe they attract people, but they also offend some people. And I think taking the position that your number one objective here is not to vote for Chuck Schumer. If I were a Democratic senator, I'd be looking for generation change myself and new leadership of the sort and description that you gave. I think his name was Mr. Phillips. So I endorse that, but I guess I'd be curious to hear your reaction to the notion that your candidacy is founded as sort of a primary position on opposing Chuck Schumer's leadership if and when you're elected senator from Maine.
No, I mean, and I want to make this very clear. This is not a foundational element of my candidacy. My candidacy is founded on fighting for Medicare for all, on frankly clawing back war powers from the executive branch. As somebody that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, I find that fairly important, especially as we're about to start a new war with Venezuela for no apparent reason. Um, and I think in general, we need to figure out how to use power in the Senate to get money out of politics. And that way we can start fighting for far more structural change, because I think it is structural change that is a necessity. My stance about Chuck Schumer's leadership has nothing to do with Chuck Schumer, quite frankly, as a person. It has more to do with like just what I am seeing in the Senate right now, our inability to leverage power and to use it. And I just think that at this point, we need to be looking for other leadership, Chris Van Hollen, Brian Schatz. I mean, I think I could come up with a number of names so I can think of who I think would be excellent in this role, who I think understand power and want to wield it. It's not a litmus test. You know, if somebody else wants to come out and fight for Medicare for all, but wants to vote for Chuck Schumer for leader, I'm going to have no problems with that at all. I personally think to get Medicare for all, we're probably going to have to not have the current leadership that we have. But to me, it's not foundational in any way, shape, or form. It's more just it's tactical, if anything else.
Okay, I believe we have a question from Oren at ABC News. Oren, you can unmute yourself.
Good morning, and thanks so much for doing this. So Graham, my question for you is the critiques and so sorry. Let me get my camera working. Try that again. All right. Thanks for doing this. Question for you: the critiques and controversies mentioned in the poll that were given to the poll respondents, they're likely to be brought up against you in the primary and the general if you win the primary, in ads, debates, etc. But the other candidates aren't going to share the rebuttals with voters like the poll did. They won't share your explanations and what you've said about that. They'll just share the critiques. They'll use them as sound bites, for instance. How are you going to get ahead of the critiques as voters start tuning into the race more? Are you concerned that you're going to have to be constantly playing defense?
No, not honestly, not really. And I'll just this is going to settle this. Maine has 1.4 million people in it, and we have 500,000 to 600,000 active voters. That's a city in other parts of this country. Maine is also a uniquely small state with a lot of small communities. We are very much a 2 degree of separation kind of state. Building out the on-the-ground apparatus that we're focused on, the ground game, the door knocking, the volunteers. I mean, we have at this point over 13,000 volunteers who are excited to go out, knock doors, talk to their neighbors. And more so, I'm also continuing to do that myself. I mean, that's why we've been doing a statewide town hall swing for the past almost 2 months at this point. And I've held 33 or 34 town halls across the state, all open events. Everybody's welcome to come and ask me questions. I'm happy to talk to folks. I think that's how you fight it. You fight it by, frankly, building a movement, building power, and then engaging with people directly. I mean, I think to represent working people, you have to go out into working people's communities and talk to them. And I say that because as a working person, it's the only way I'd ever have access to my senator. So I am going to continue doing that. I think that by being proactive, by being aggressive in many ways, going on offense not around the messaging, not around fighting back, but about what it is we are trying to build, talking to people at the policies I am trying to work on, the world that I envision, the theory of power that I have, and our need to build it amongst working people in this state. That is how we fight back against that stuff. And I will just finish with this. Those attacks, they were coming anyways. I'm pushing for Medicare for all. They're going to call me a communist. I'm an out and out anti-fascist, and somebody somewhere is going to come along and try to turn that around into some left-wing radicalism. This is all like these things are bound to happen. And for me, it's I think a lot of people in Maine, as the polling shows, I think just in general, a lot of people see all of this as nonsense. The negative attack ads, all like we've been doing this for decades at this point, and everybody's sick and tired of it. I think what people really want is a politics that is going to engage with them and be engaged by them, be like have a back and forth. And so I'm going to continue to make myself accessible to people, and I think that quite frankly is the best way to do it.
Sounds great. Graham has to go in a second. Nancy, after Graham is gone, I'm going to ask you to also reply to that back and forth question because I think you've seen a lot of that. We have one more question from Stephen Newcomb at Axios. Stephen?
If you can't get him, do you want to just ask the question directly at him?
I don't know what that voice was, but sure. Hi, Maria. All right. If Stephen is not unmuted, the question from him was, what are your thoughts on the relationship you've been able to form with some Democratic senators in Washington? Have you had a chance to meet with members of the Fight Club, as reported, I believe, in the New York Times this past week, folks like Elizabeth Warren and Chris Murphy and others? And what have those conversations been like, if you're here to share?
Yes, I've had several meetings with multiple members of the quote unquote Fight Club. Although to be fair, I met with them before it was called the Fight Club, or at least before that. I haven't been to DC since after that story happened. They've been excellent interactions. I've been able to have conversations with people I have an immense amount of respect for, frankly, about these topics, about power building, about movement building, about the need to utilize the levers of power that exist in the Senate to push back effectively against the unconstitutional and illegal activities of the Trump administration. And then about also looking down the road, how do we build power, both in a movement sense and also like within the Senate itself, to pass things like Medicare for all, to re-engage the legislature's constitutional right around war powers. Like these are things that we're going to need to build power on to make happen. And it's been incredibly heartening to have those conversations with members of the Fight Club and frankly, multiple other Democratic members of the Senate around these issues. And to find, I mean, we have a lot of common ground on this stuff.
Sounds great. Okay, I know you have to go. I'm just going to read you two last questions, which I think line you up perfectly for some final comments. Mateo asks, your platform focuses heavily on working class economic issues. What is one specific federal policy that Democrats have gotten wrong on the economy, and how would you approach it differently as a senator for Maine? And Jan Goodman asks, would you support removing the cap on Social Security payroll taxes to both stabilize and solidify the Social Security system? So both of those bear on working class economics. Do you want to offer some final thoughts, Graham?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's very funny because the second question goes to the first one. The answer is yes. I am a firm believer in removing the cap. It is, in fact, this is something that when I talk to working people in Maine and explain what the cap is, Republican, Democrat, Independent, does not matter. Everybody thinks it's the dumbest thing they've ever heard. Everybody always says things like, well, that seems like it's just good for rich people. And I get to say things like, that is correct, which is why we have it. That is something I think that we as the Democratic Party have failed on miserably. That should have been a plank. It should be a talking point. It should be something we've pushed for, I mean, really since Reagan brought it about back in the 80s. We should have been trying to repeal it ever since. And so that I think specifically is a perfect example of something that the Democrats have gotten very wrong, where there has been opposition to it, but as a party, we have not been arrayed together trying to remove the cap. Because if we had been, we could have gotten rid of it in one of the many, many times we had both the executive and the legislative branches. So it's that to me that is one that I think we failed miserably at. And I will finish with this. I also think we should have enshrined the right to choose in federal law a long time ago. I think that was a completely missed opportunity when we had it. And moving forward, the first chance we get, that needs to be something that we put into statute forever and all time. And yeah, I mean, that's what I want to do. I mean, I very much want to come into this and help re-inject into the Democratic Party much of, I think, the ideals that many Democratic voters want it to be, which is the party that fights for working people, is the party of big structural change again, the party of FDR, the party of talking about things like an economic bill of rights. Like this is something that we used to be and we used to embody on the whole, fighting for labor constantly. The idea of a labor Democrat, I think, should not exist. All Democrats should be pro-labor. We shouldn't have to convince people to vote for the PRO Act. That should be a thing that we just do. So I think that this is the kind of energy I want to bring and the kinds of policies I want to fight for. And I have an immense amount of hope because most Democratic voters, this is the party that they joined. It's the party that they want, and I think we have a real opportunity here to return to our roots in many ways and turn it into the party of working people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Graham.
Thank you.
We're going to continue the conversation in a moment, but before Graham goes, he just mentioned the energy we want to bring. So we're going to unmute people again and just ask people to, again, show your enthusiasm for Graham Platner and what you just heard. We're unmuting right now, I believe. And there we go. On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Let's say thank you.
Thank you very much. Good job.
There you go.
Awesome.
Go, go, go.
Thanks, Graham. Have a good one.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. And thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, so Stephanie and Nancy, want to ask you just for your reflections on what you just heard there. Nancy, there was one back and forth question that you can get to, but Stephanie, do you want to offer just some initial thoughts on that?
No, I think that Graham's focus, ongoing focus, away from all the distractions, away from all the attacks, away from all of the petty politics, to be really laser focused on how do we make life better for regular Americans? How do we undo the corporate capture of our economy and our democracy? I think is what voters want. And what's fascinating to me about Nancy's poll is that this poll also reflects that. And so I hope people feel as excited and energized as I do after seeing these poll results and hearing from Graham. This is just really very, very exciting.
Amen. And I will point out that the donate link and volunteer link are both in the chat right now. Nancy, any reflections on what you heard him say in relation to your poll and on that back and forth question that was posed by the ABC reporter?
Yeah. And so the question was basically about negatives and will you be constantly on defense? As I was thinking more and more about this poll, the more I thought, if I'm Janet Mills, I just made the biggest mistake by putting this out there so soon because Maine is so small. And as you can see, like Graham is incredibly talented and he connects well. And so when everyone's concerned with electability, when Democrats are in a Democratic state are very concerned about electability, they're very concerned about what's happening in DC. His response has still been credible and it's reached people. This is Maine, it's small, like people are paying attention. It's an older state, so, a more rural state, so people are more likely to actually see these things on the news. It's much harder to communicate in states like, like New York or Florida or California or Texas. People have heard this news. They've heard him. He's responded, and they've obviously found it credible, or else you wouldn't see the results like this. The fact that there is not movement in this survey because people have already heard it. And so, yes, people are going to bring it up, but I think it's going to start to be like old news. In fact, it starts to blow back on Mills to see, like, why are you continuing to try to attack the evident frontrunner? Why are you trying to undermine our party's chances? I think she has a risk there of being too negative, talking too much about the negative case against him. And same if I were in the party that was, if I'm a Susan Collins in a state that is, a blue state, I don't want to be spending all my time talking about, negatives. I want to spend a lot more time on positives. That is the reason why you win if you're the opposite party in a state that, is as blue as Maine. So she also runs a risk of she can't also just run an entirely negative campaign about him either. Um, and so now Graham gets an opportunity to transition back to a positive message, having had this, aired out so early in a campaign, and so credibly responded to those attacks. And so he gets to give that message that not just Democrats, but all Mainers are really hungry for. I just want to emphasize again also, like, people are really upset about elderly politicians that they think are not up for the fight of not just fighting Trump, but fighting for the kind of agenda that we really need in this country to create real change. And you see that in Graham, but you certainly don't see it in Mills. And, Collins is also of that same stripe. And so the more he's able to now transition and talk and give that positive pitch, the better. Yeah.
Yep. Totally. I'll add a couple thoughts. One, right when some of the negative stuff was coming out about him, Michelle Goldberg of the New York Times was on the fence about whether to continue her planned trip up to Maine. She went up to Maine, bore witness to Graham filling gymnasiums full of hundreds and hundreds of people, and wrote a piece that I'm actually putting in the chat right now. I thought Graham Platner was finished. What I saw in Maine changed my mind. And what she basically said was, it's contagious. The attacks are actually fueling more people going into the room. People are leaving there buzzing to their neighbors about how good he is. And that speaks to what a small state Maine is. And if you picture a year before the election, 200, 400, 800 people packed in gymnasiums telling their friends not to believe the negative stuff and all the awesome, inspiring vision stuff, that really, before we get to any of the advertising, has a big impact. But then it's really important to note, and this is why it's so important that we donate if we can today. He has already raised over $4 million in grassroots donations, which will allow him to rebut any attacks and then pivot to his on offense message. The more we believe in his on offense vision and message, and the more we want to help him defend from attacks, the more we should be donating and volunteering for his campaign. So we just posted the links again in the chat. Hope everybody can bookmark them, click them now. We don't want you to lose them. We'll also send them out in a wrap up of this call that you should get in your inbox from us very shortly. I think with that, we are ready to wrap up, but really appreciate everyone who joined us today. It's great to see so many familiar faces and new faces, folks who have been with us for a long time. We got some comments in the chat saying this is a great way to do a press event. So we're thrilled to both merge media interest and grassroots member interest, and we'll try to do more of these in the future. So with that, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.